After cleaning up the mold lines as best I could, considering all of the mummy wrappings, I glued the miniature to the base and applied AK Interactive's concrete texture base to build up a desert floor. Once dry, I head outside and prime the miniature with a ruddy brown before giving it a zenithal spray of mustard yellow, followed by a second zenithal spray of tan. The tan is only sprayed from directly overhead. I then head back inside and hit the miniature with some of Army Painter's speed paints, starting with a dark brown for the flesh, a blue and a yellow for parts of the sash-like clothing, and an off-white for the bandages. The sand for the base was done with the same yellow I already had out. I find that it helps to immediately wick away any excess pooling, though otherwise I try my best to not cover any spots I already touched with the speed paints. The rest of the work on this miniature will be done with oil paints, but before we get into that, a quick word from today's sponsor. I'm just kidding. I barely got 1,000 subscribers at the time of this video. I ain't got no damn sponsors. But you can help that by clicking all of them good for me buttons, and it'll only cost you a few seconds of your time and less than 1 calories worth of effort. I haven't used oils very much other than washes, which is what I start with here. After the speed paints are fully dried, I thin a mix of dark brown and some red and spread this all over. I take the time to wick away any excess as needed. After about 30 minutes, I come back to wipe away the oil wash from the upraised areas. Here I use cotton swabs lightly dampened in mineral spirits. I'm only using cotton swabs because I couldn't find my makeup sponges. I prefer not to use cotton because the cotton tends to come apart very easily and leaves tiny fibers all over the miniature, especially on these metal ones. To be fair, I may be applying too much pressure, and it might not also help that these are about the cheapest cotton swabs you can purchase. I then add some oil paints to a piece of scrap cardboard and let it sit for 15 to 30 minutes to allow a little time for it to soak up some of the linseed oil used to bind the pigments. After which I begin adding little touches of the oil paints here and there for shadows in the recesses and for highlights, starting with the flesh. Once a color I'm actively working with has been applied all around, I immediately swap to a soft flat brush and gently tap and buff the color to soften and blend the existing tone. There seems to be a very fine line with how much mineral spirits you can have in the brush and how the oil paints will then behave. A minute amount seems to help the oil paint flow smoother, much like having water in your brush helping acrylic paint spread. But just a little touch more and all of a sudden your oil paint runs like a wash. Also, to be fair, the brushes I use for trying to do the highlighting in this video are admittedly garbage, and their tips are far beyond what should have been replaced a long time ago. I don't seem to have good luck with synthetic brushes, and I may be too harsh with them, as well as just not replacing them as often as I should. I move on to the blue clothing next, and whereas I use several colors for the flesh, I only end up using one mixed tone for the blue highlights. After applying and buffing it down, however, I reapply it and buff it a second time, though over a smaller area, treating it like it was a brighter highlight. It does work as such, as its bluish white builds up over the first application, and then it brightens up noticeably. For the yellow tones, I follow the same path as I did with the blue, touches of yellow, smoothing them out with a flat brush, and repeat, though only adding the second touch to the most upper raised areas exposed to the desert sun high above. For the bandages, I started with warm white. Now, let me tell you about my brain and how it tries to shunt the blame for my personal failures onto other factors. After applying said white, when I began buffing and blending it into the existing paint, it immediately began tinting yellow. My first dumbass thought was that, oh, the white is behaving oddly with the ogreish howling speed paint, and somehow turned to yellow. That stupid thought legitimately went through my head before I managed to scold my hubris into submission and accept what the reality was, that I just forgot to wipe all the yellow paint out of my buffing brush before I started at the white. However, my idiocy was unjustly rewarded, as this yellow tint into the white gave me what I ultimately wanted, a dingy sand-stained faded off-white. With a better plan now in place, I cleaned out my buffing brush by wiping all of the paint onto a dry paper towel, and then I finish adding the off-white to all of the bandages and blend them in. Then I add a few touches of yellow, mostly where the shadows would be a little stronger, but also a little bit here and there to act as random stains and not just shadows. I then blend these in to make the bandages look more aged, or maybe like this mummy might have been used as a mattress by R. Kelly and one of his guests. Yeah. Then I add the same yellow in the same manner for some rough highlights to the top of the base. I decided to try to add a brighter highlight to the flesh, however this was in my opinion a mistake as I wanted that beef jerky brown skin tone that is often seen in photographs of real mummies, and this was far too bright and was dangerously close to the tone used for the bandages. I should have just left the brightest tones as they were and either darkened the recesses or even better, let everything sit for a few days to ensure it's totally dry, and then mix a thin dark wash and apply it to just the flesh to tint it back down. I opted to just mix a thin wash and drop it into the recesses instead, at least to darken them, though I probably should have added less magenta as this almost looks as if it's blood stains or a slight angry skin damage which is typically associated with life. I brown out the base for once before I clean up by rinsing my synthetic brushes in mineral spirits and wiping them on a paper towel before wadding everything else up on my makeshift cardboard palette and tossing it into the trash. I then get to call it a night. This is where I stopped, and let's just go ahead and jump straight into the lessons learned, starting with the egregious mold lines that are visible on the legs, upper arms, and side of the head. I did not want to fix each of these individual bandage lines due to the sheer amount of time it would have taken, which would have probably been hours more of work, whereas this entire project took me only 3 hours as it was. Ultimately, it would have looked far better had I done so, but considering I was just using this mummy as further experience with oils, I told myself that I could live with this one. My next gripe is that the warm white and raw sienna highlight on the flesh was too bright and was getting too close to the tones for the bandages. Instead, I should have darkened the recesses more instead of increasing the values. The next issue was when I was buffing the first warm white highlight on the bandages. I did not wipe all of the residual yellow paint from my buffing brush from the previous color used. This heavily tinted the off-white to yellow. In the end, this worked out as it gave a dingy look that I liked. However, it wasn't intentional and is something I need to be cognizant of going forward. The last wash I used on the recesses and old wounds in the flesh was too rooting. I shouldn't have mixed the magenta in with raw umber, as it gave too much warmth and more signs of life than I intended, ultimately taking away from the walking human beef jerky appearance I was aiming for. Also, I'm pretty sure if I had some brushes that could maintain a fine tip for the highlights, I could have made this come out even better. But right now, I consider this more basic practice with how oil paints feel. And considering this is only my third project where I primarily only use oil paints, I think it came out decent enough. In the end, I'm happy enough with the colors used for everything except the flesh, though I may come back with a pen wash for the bandages, eye sockets, and mouth after everything is completely dried. I may also add a very thin dark wash to all of no, let's be real, I'm not going to do any of that. This miniature's done. For 3 hours of work, I can live with where it's at. And that'll bring this video to its end. I hope you learned something or inspired to start or expand your own collection of dead yet not so dead folks still walking around when they shouldn't be just because their brains were plucked out through their nostrils and they were wrapped in a lot of boxes of band-aids. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and if you like the content of this video and would like to see more, you can easily support the channel by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Jim with Working with Miniatures. I'm truly grateful for your time, and I bid you a fond farewell. Until the next video.